Alternative rock will never be the same without these two greats. Did they really commit suicide, or was that just a convenient cover-up? Follow me down the rabbit hole about Chester Bennington and Chris Cornell. Hello, friends, and welcome back to the rabbit hole. I'm your host, Danny, and today we are talking about Chester Bennington and Chris Cornell, and if they really committed suicide, which, spoiler alert, I don't think they did, and we're going to get into why. Thank you, Cassie, Bernice, Travis, William, Paige, Jenna, Janelle, and David, along with everybody else that has messaged me over the past couple weeks with this request. I feel like when I get this many messages, videos, different things coming in about one particular conspiracy theory, I can't ignore it. I have to jump on that conspiracy theory. So here we are. We are going to go over all the crazy things because it kind of blew my mind what I learned. So thank you for the request. And of course, I want to start the episode by thanking our sponsor. So thank you, Wise Wolf Gold, for sponsoring my podcast. Guys, if you want gold and silver delivered straight to your front door for as little as $50 a month, all you have to do is go to rabbithole.gold right now, and it's delivered to your front door. It's so easy. I know that, this is going to sound silly. I get intimidated sometimes going into gold and silver places because, I don't really know what I'm talking about. Online, I can do it all hassle-free. I don't have to talk to anybody, and it's super easy. So go to rabbithole.gold right now if you want gold and silver. And please take care because this episode does have to do with child sexual abuse, and we talk about different things involving children, kind of like Pizzagate. We're going to kind of dig into Pizzagate a little bit more. So if that's something you just can't handle today, maybe don't listen to this episode. But we're going to begin with Chester Bennington. Chester Charles Bennington was born in Phoenix, Arizona on March 20th, 1976. His mom, Susan, worked as a nurse, and his dad, Lee, investigated child sexual abuse cases as a police detective. I don't usually go into what department the parent is in. I usually would just say, his dad was a police detective. But in this case, I think it kind of matters. So, Chester grew up the youngest of 4 children, and he was interested in music from a young age and dreamed of becoming a member of Stone Temple Pilots. When he was 7 years old, an older male friend sexually abused him. This abuse continued for years until he was about 13. He was afraid to speak out about this or ask for help because he didn't want to be labeled as gay or as a liar, so he just didn't ever say anything. He would later tell his father who it was, but he never pressed charges against that person. When Chester was 11, his parents divorced and his father got custody of him. After that, he was mostly left to his own devices. He rarely saw his siblings and he didn't talk to his parents much. He said of the situation, quote, "When my mom left, my whole family pretty much disappeared," end quote. As a kid dealing with abuse and his parents' divorce, he was super overwhelmed, as most kids would be. So he would draw pictures or write poetry or songs to try to comfort himself. But when that didn't work, he started using drugs and alcohol, such as marijuana, opium, cocaine, meth, and LSD. And he was bullied in school very, very badly. In 1993, when he was 17, he moved in with his mom, who he had not lived with primarily for years, and she found out that he was doing drugs, so she banned him from leaving the house. She's like, "You're just not going to go anywhere. You will stay here." During this same time, he started singing with the band called Sean Dowdell and His Friends. It does have a question mark at the end. And they released a 3-track EP. Then him and Sean Dowdell decided to form a post-grunge band called Grey Days. Post-grunge was like grunge music, but it was a little bit less aggressive, and they have a more smooth, polished sound. So think Foo Fighters or Nickelback. So Grey Days went on to have 2 albums, Wake Me in 1994 and No Sun Today in 1997. In 1996, he had a son from a relationship with Elka Brand, and he also married his first wife, Samantha Marie Olet, in October of 1996. The couple would go on to have 1 child together in 2002. In 1998, Chester left Grey Daze. He was getting frustrated with his music career. It wasn't really shaping up to be what he thought it was going to be. So he thought like, okay, I'm just done. I'm going to quit music. I gave it a good run. I gave it a good try. But that is until Jeff Blue, a vice president of Zomba Music in Los Angeles, called him and offered him an audition with a band known as Zero with an X. This band would eventually be known as Linkin Park. In order to attend this audition, he quit his day job at a digital services firm and traveled to California. And we all know how that story ended. He ended up getting the spot in the band. With that, they got right to work writing new songs for a new album with Chester. In October 2000, Linkin Park released their debut album, Hybrid Theory. This album was huge. The band had been promoting itself all over the internet, which was kind of a new thing back then. So when they would go to a new city, a lot of the people already knew their stuff because they were on the internet and it was kind of getting more popular. And Linkin Park was in like every chat room they could possibly be in. The album debuted at 29 on the US Billboard 200. The problem was Linkin Park didn't really fit into one genre of music. They weren't nu metal like Korn or Limp Bizkit, but they also weren't heavier than that. And they kind of mixed in rap, screaming, and electronic sound in a new way that was really hard to classify them. Sometime in 2002, they released an album that most people don't even really talk about called Reanimation. This was more electronic music and a little less nu metal, and it had more experimental sounds. It's like a remix album, basically. Similar to what an underground hip-hop record would be. It wasn't made for the mainstream, which is why most of us don't even know about it because it wasn't a mainstream album. However, a lot of people called it a super underrated album. In 2003, the band's second album, Meteora, was released and reached number 1 on the Billboard 200 album chart. It was a huge success. MTV2 named Linkin Park the 6th greatest band of the music video era and the 3rd best of the new millennium. In 2005, Chester co-founded another band, Dead by Sunrise. This was an electronic rock band. Unfortunately, he and his wife Samantha got divorced in 2005. The following year, in 2006, he adopted his son's mother, Elka Brand's other son, who was born just a year after his son was born, which he had no relation to. And then he also got married in 2006 to Talinda Ann Bentley, a former Playboy model. They went on to have 3 kids of their own, one that same year in 2006, and the twins came in 2011. Chester and Talinda were harassed by a cyberstalker who tampered with emails and hacked into their accounts. The stalker also sent the couple threatening messages. They were eventually caught and sentenced to 2 years in jail. But all of this must have taken a toll on Chester because he went to rehab twice that year. The band's 3rd album, Minutes to Midnight, released in 2007, also reached number 1 on the Billboard 200 album chart. Some diehard fans call this their best album. In 2008, Dead by Sunrise, his other band, made their live debut performing at the 13th anniversary party for Club Tattoo in Tempe, Arizona. Club Tattoo was owned by Sean Dowdell, Chester's friend from his first 2 bands, and the band only released 1 album, Out of Ashes, in 2009. In 2010, 1,000 Suns came out. It was probably one of their most experimental albums. In 2012, they came out with Living Things, their 5th studio album, and in 2013, Scott Weiland parted ways with Stone Temple Pilots, and to replace him, the band recruited Chester, and he took stage with Stone Temple Pilots in May of that year, which had always been a dream of his. It was later announced that he would be the frontman of the band. He recorded a song with them, Out of Time, which they sang shortly after recruiting him, and was on the EP High Rise they released in October 2013. Like I said, singing lead vocals for Stone Temple Pilots was a lifelong dream for Chester. In 2014, Linkin Park dropped their 6th album, The Hunting Party. This album was more raw and more loud than Living Things. Unfortunately, in 2015, he had to leave Stone Temple Pilots due to his commitments with Linkin Park, which was his first band, but he did leave the band on very good terms. Chester often spoke about his mental health. Since his traumatic childhood and through his musical career as an adult, he struggled with depression. He said during a 2009 interview that music is what kept him alive. That's how he gets out what's inside of him and works through a lot of his emotions, was through his music. He also struggled with drug abuse and alcoholism throughout his life. However, he did eventually get clean from both drugs and alcohol. 2017 was the year of tragedy. Linkin Park's seventh and last album came out, One More Light. This album was released on May 19th, 2017, just the day after Chester's close friend Chris Cornell of Soundgarden and Audioslave committed suicide by hanging. Chester took to Twitter stating that he could not imagine a world without Chris in it in a letter pinned to Chris. The band performed their song One More Light in Chris's honor on Jimmy Kimmel Live the night after his death. A week later, on May 26th, Chester sang Hallelujah at Chris's funeral. Just 64 days after his friend took his life, on July 20th, 2017, Chester Bennington was found dead at his home. Authority ruled his death a suicide by hanging, but he left no suicide note. The date was significant to him because it was the birthday of Chris Cornell. His funeral was on July 29th and included a full stage of musical tributes. The band later hosted a concert tribute to Chester's life, and a number of artists paid tribute to him in their own ways over the years. Most of them would cover one of Linkin Park's songs, usually the song Crawling. Some of the bands that did this include Coldplay, Machine Gun Kelly, Imagine Dragons, and Godsmack, which goes to show just how big of an impact Chester had on the industry. And Jay-Z paid tribute to Chester on several occasions by performing Numb/Encore, which he had collaborated on with Linkin Park. Now, I'm not trying to take anything away from the tributes or the life of Chester Bennington. I know that was a really, he made a big impact. But isn't it interesting that Jay-Z has collaborated with so many artists that ended up taking their own lives? I just thought I'd include that because, that is weird. Take that how you will. The following year, during the 60th annual Grammy Awards, Logic performed the song 1-800-273-8255 as a tribute to both Chris and Chester. At the time, that was a suicide hotline number, but has since been changed to 988. Chester's family insisted that he was happy and he was excited for the upcoming tour that Linkin Park had planned, and that they were fully blindsided by the death of Chester. I mean, he was literally just on vacation with his family right before. He left the vacation a couple days before his family did to go home so he could rest, he could get ready because he was about to go on tour. So he knew everything that he needed to get done at home. He needed to do a little bit more work. And then he was found dead, which we'll get into more in just a little while. With that, now we're going to jump to the life of Chris Cornell. Christopher John Boyle was born on July 20th, 1964 in Seattle, Washington. His dad, Edward, was a pharmacist of Irish Catholic descent, and his mom, Karen, was an accountant and self-proclaimed psychic of Jewish descent. He was one of 6 children in the family, having 2 older brothers and 3 younger sisters. Chris attended a Catholic elementary school where he first performed in front of a crowd, and he took piano and guitar lessons as a child. In 7th grade, he was pulled from Catholic school because his mom was worried that he was going to get kicked out for being too inquisitive. So he started asking some questions that basically the teachers couldn't answer. And so they kind of started writing home, and mom was like, okay, maybe we should just put you in a regular high school. So he did, before dropping out altogether. His inquisitive nature may have come from hanging out with kids that were older than him and being exposed to just darker things as a younger kid because of the older kids. But when he was a teenager, his parents got divorced and the kids ended up taking their mom's maiden name. That's why we all know him as Chris Cornell and not Chris Boyle. As a teen, he went through a lot. So his dad was incredibly abusive, which is what led to the divorce between his parents. So he turned to music, as so many people do. Peter Cornell, Chris's brother, once said, quote, "My father was a tyrannical alcoholic and physically abusive man. He beat the shit out of me and my brothers," end quote. He became obsessed with the Beatles. He developed severe social anxiety and could really only be around other people because of music. His depression was so bad that he dropped out of high school. Like, that's literally the reason why he dropped out. And after he dropped out, he didn't really leave the house for nearly 2 years because he had a panic disorder and agoraphobia, which is where you feel unsafe in your environment. So you just stay where you know is safe. So some people with agoraphobia literally never leave their house because they're so scared of the outside world, which was the case for Chris. He started using drugs and alcohol to cope at age 12, but stopped around age 14 before continuing their use at age 15. Chris kept turning back to music and credited his mom for saving his life when she bought him a snare drum. This was a launching pad for his career as a rock musician. In the early 1980s, he was a member of the cover band The Shemps. This is where he met bassist Hiro Yamamoto. After the Shemps broke up, Chris and Hiro started playing together, and they eventually recruited Kim Thale to join, and Kim had joined the Shemps after Hiro had left, so Hiro and Kim didn't really know each other all that well, but together the three of them started Soundgarden in 1984. The band members were living in the same house together, and so they recorded 15 songs in their homemade studio. And these songs were called the First 15, and it is what led to them eventually getting a record deal. Chris was originally on drums and vocals, but by 1985, Scott Sundquist joined the band as a drummer, so Chris could just focus on vocals. Some of the band's songs appeared on a compilation with 6 other bands called Deep Six in 1985. The other bands were Green River, Malfunction, The Melvins, Skinyard, and U-Men. In 1986, Scott left the band to spend more time with his family and was replaced by Skinyard's drummer Matt Cameron. A lady in the Seattle area that ran the college radio station, she compiled a cassette of bands she thought were really good in the Seattle area, and she labeled it Bands That Will Make Money. And then she sent this cassette tape out to all these major radio stations throughout the country, and this is actually how Soundgarden got recognition, and then major labels just started calling them. Like, they wanted to sign them. But Soundgarden really wanted to stay as independent as possible. They wanted to sign with, like, independent record labels because they didn't really like the idea of being with a major record label just yet. Eventually they would be, but at the time they were like, I don't know. And also, Chris said in an interview, he's like, I was just answering the phone. We didn't have a manager. They weren't going through anybody. They were just coming to me, and I was answering the phone. So he was so new and green in this world that he didn't really know what to even do. In 1987, they signed to Sub Pop Records, which was an independent record label, and they released the Screaming Life EP. Sub Pop Records was the record label to be signed to as a Seattle area grunge band. The following year, they released the FOP EP. It was also in 1988 when they signed with another independent record label, SST Records, instead of going with a major label yet again. Then they released their debut album, Ultra Mega OK, with SST Records, and this album earned the band a Grammy nomination for Best Metal Performance in 1990. Because of the success of the album, the band ended up signing with A&M Records. They were the first grunge band to sign with a major label, and this actually resulted in some backlash from their fans because they were grunge fans, and to them, grunge was against the mainstream, so you shouldn't sign with a mainstream label. But the band never really labeled themselves as grunge, nor accepted the label. In fact, they said that all the bands under this genre didn't really sound alike, but they all kind of got grouped together because they were in the same location and they didn't really fit into any other genre, so they were all just grunge. And that way, it was easier to put them in a section in like a retail store. But Soundgarden had regretted signing to the independent label SST because they felt like they didn't have a great connection with the producer they were working with. In 1989, they released Louder Than Love. However, following this release, Hiro left the band. He went on to finish his degree in physical chemistry. He was replaced with former Nirvana guitarist Jason Everman. Although Jason didn't really last long, he was fired after the band finished their Louder Than Love tour. However, Metallica guitarist Kirk Hammett said he was inspired to write the riff for Enter Sandman after listening to the Louder Than Love album, which, what an iconic guitar riff, right? Like, awesome. You hear that, you know what song it is. Anyway, I just thought that was like kind of a cool fun fact that I didn't know before, is that Metallica got inspiration from Soundgarden. Finally, in 1990, Ben Shepherd joined the band as the new bassist because they didn't have Hero anymore. This same year, he married Susan Silver, who was the manager for Alice in Chains, Soundgarden, and Screaming Trees. They had been dating for about 5 years at this point. The pair would go on to have a daughter in 2000. The grunge scene in Seattle was gaining popularity, and Soundgarden was a huge part of that. In 1991, they released Bad Motorfinger, and this album brought the band to the next level of commercial success. Their 3 singles from the album, Jesus Christ Pose, Outshined, and Rusty Cage, were being played on alternative rock stations around the US and on MTV, which was a huge thing because they were just a grunge band, right? Rusty Cage was even covered by Johnny Cash in 1996. Bad Motorfinger was nominated for a Grammy for Best Metal Performance in 1992, and Jesus Christ Pose was banned from MTV because it upset some Christian groups around the country for being anti-Christian. But the song was about how he felt some celebrities and famous musicians were hypocritically using religion for their own personal benefit and gain. But because of how it depicted things in the video, they just took it down. While still working with Soundgarden, Chris helped to form Temple of the Dog. So this band was conceived out of the loss of Andrew Wood, the lead singer for Malfunction and Mother Love Bone. Andrew was Chris's roommate and died of a heroin overdose. The band included Stone Gossard and Jeff Ament, who were both in Mother Love Bone with Andrew and who would go on to be in Pearl Jam. Mike McCready and Matt Cameron were also in Temple of the God and would go on to be in Pearl Jam. And then, of course, Eddie Vedder would guest appear on some Temple of the Dog songs, and he would be the front man for Pearl Jam. The band only released one album, which was self-titled in 1991. Just 4 months later, Pearl Jam released its debut album. In 1994, their 4th album, Super Unknown, was released. This was the band's breakthrough album. It debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200. The album included the singles Spoon Man and Black Hole Sun. However, with this album came burnout for Chris. He was just so overwhelmed. His marriage was struggling. His mental health was falling apart. He had been touring. He had been writing. He had been recording. He was just burnt out. The band's 5th album was self-produced. Down on the Upside was released in 1996. And it wasn't as heavy as the albums before it. It was criticized as taking a departure from the band's grunge roots, but again, they never identified as grunge. But Soundgarden said they wanted to experiment with other sounds, and they had that right. Like, they were just going to try to figure out their own thing. Chris wanted to move away from the heavy guitar riffs, but Kim liked them and pointed out that they were kind of a trademark of the band. So this led to tension within the band, and on April 9th, 1997, Soundgarden announced that it was disbanding. This led to Chris working on material for a solo album. Euphoria Morning was released in September of 1999, followed by a 7-month tour. The album wasn't super successful. I mean, he did get a Grammy nomination from the single Can't Change Me, but as a whole, it wasn't as successful as Soundgarden was. In 2001, Audioslave was formed. Zach De La Rocha left Rage Against the Machine, and the rest of the members were looking for a new guitarist. And that's when Chris was kind of like mentioned as a good option. So Chris was in the process of writing his 2nd solo album, but put that completely on hold when the remaining members of Rage Against the Machine called him. They're like, hey man, can you come sing for us? So he sang for the group, and they knew immediately, like, this is the guy. We need this guy. And they went straight to work on writing new songs. In 2002, their debut album Audioslave was released, and it featured hits such as Like a Stone and Show Me How to Live. The album was, again, a huge success. But behind the scenes, Chris was struggling with alcohol problems, and it was rumored and later confirmed that he had even checked himself into rehab. He revealed that he had gone through a horrible personal crisis during the making of the first Audioslave record. The band toured through 2003, and Chris was finally sober. 2004 was a year of resets, so he and Susan finally divorced after struggling and being separated for years, and then he married Vicky Karayanis. and they welcomed a daughter together in September that year and a son the following year. In 2005, their second album, Out of Exile, was released. This album was even more successful than the first, with songs like Be Yourself, Your Time Has Come, and Doesn't Remind Me. The band's third album came the following year, titled Revelations. This album had 2 songs that were featured in the 2006 movie Miami Vice. Although, after this album, they didn't tour. Instead, they decided to take a break, which allowed Chris to finish the theme song he was writing for the 2006 James Bond film Casino Royale, and also just kind of like take a break. On February 15th, 2007, after months of rumors, it was announced that Chris would be leaving Audioslave. Audioslave got back together for one show on January 17th, 2017 at Prophets of Rage's anti-inaugural ball. So this was a ball protesting the inauguration of Donald Trump, but that was the last time. They said that potentially they would get back together more often, but in 2017, Chris unfortunately died. The rest of 2007 saw Chris guest starring on parts of different artist tours, and he toured with Linkin Park in 2008, and he even joined the band on stage during parts of their songs. He continued his solo career, announcing in 2011 that he would go on a solo acoustic tour called Songbook. He released the live album Songbook in November 2011. In 2012, the Chris and Vicky Cornell Foundation was established. This foundation was to aid the homeless, the poor, and abused or neglected children. In 2015, he released his last studio album, Higher Truth. It was just after midnight on May 18th, 2017, when Chris's bodyguard found him unconscious in the bathroom of his hotel room. He was staying in Detroit after performing with Soundgarden on May 17th. And this is also why some reports say that he died on May 17th, because it was like 12:15 a.m. He had an exercise band around his neck and blood in his mouth. The official ruling was suicide by hanging. But like I said, he was found at 12:15 a.m., but medical personnel didn't arrive on the scene until 12:56 a.m., and he wasn't pronounced dead until 1:30 a.m. And actually, many questions about this timeline have popped up because people are like, this doesn't make any sense, but the police swear it's accurate. But Vicky wasn't satisfied with the report, stating it was incomplete. She pointed out that her husband had suffered from a head injury mentioned in 2 clinical reports, but that didn't appear on the autopsy report at all. But it kind of seems like both artists were just struggling with mental health issues and had just succumbed to depression. But you already know that if I'm talking about them, this goes a layer deeper. Both Chris and Chester may have been murdered. And there's evidence to support this. Chris had 9 broken ribs and a gash in the back of his head when he supposedly hung himself. Like I mentioned, his wife knew about this, but didn't understand why the autopsy would chalk it up to death by hanging. Like, that didn't make a lot of sense in her brain when there's a big gash in the back of his head. And the official story is that the broken ribs and the head injury just happened while they were giving him CPR. So, they got him down and then they put him on the ground and started giving him CPR. And rib fractures are not uncommon during CPR. A head injury doesn't make any sense. And not only that, but the bodyguard said that when he was hanging there, he had blood coming out of his mouth. But typically, when someone hangs themselves, they don't bleed out of their mouths. That's not common at all. But you know what does cause bleeding out of the mouth? Trauma to the chest area. Chester's autopsy showed defensive wounds. These types of wounds usually occur on hands and forearms, sometimes legs and feet. They show that a victim was fighting back against an assailant, trying to protect themselves. Why would he have defensive wounds if he wasn't being attacked? If he just hung himself, why would he have defensive wounds? Like I said earlier, Chester had just left vacation that he was on with his family to get ready for the upcoming tour. Nothing in the time leading up to his death would have caused the defensive wounds unless he was attacked. Now, I'm no expert, but both of these men were recovering addicts. If they're fighting demons so bad they're contemplating suicide, both of them are contemplating suicide, you would think that maybe they would turn to drugs and alcohol first, as they have done previously in their life, which we have seen a whole life worth of, rehab and drugs and alcohol and all this, right? We've seen all this happening in both of their lives. You would think that they would turn there first before turning to suicide. Again, this doesn't happen in every single situation. There could be recovering addicts that don't turn to drugs and alcohol and just go straight to suicide because they, like, maybe drugs and alcohol are a worse option. But the fact that it happened in both situations, I find that a little odd. But again, maybe it was just the situation. I'm not trying to say like they should have had drugs and alcohol in their system because they're recovering addicts. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that it is odd that they didn't turn to drugs and alcohol first before turning to suicide. And neither of them had any signs of drugs or alcohol in their system, and they're both recovering addicts. But maybe I'm just like looking for something that wouldn't be there. I don't know. I just thought I would include that because they're both completely clean. But the question is, if they didn't kill themselves, why were they killed? Like, why would they kill them? Chris and Chester were working together to expose Pizzagate and the pedophile ring, which has infiltrated major industries. It's most notable in political circles and in Hollywood, but the pedophile ring really leaks into other major industries and players all around the world. Allegedly, they were working on a documentary called The Silent Children. It was about the widespread pedophilia and trafficking of children. And I thought I found it. I was looking through everything. I found a documentary called Silent Children, which was posted on IMDb. But the summary of the film was odd. So firstly, it had labels as music and short, but then the description tells another story. The description says it will be a long-form documentary film with a compelling and original point of view, drawing upon the unique talents and experience of its filmmaker. It will take the viewer deep into the world that exposes the truths of child sexploitation and human trafficking, in keeping with the great tradition of hard-hitting investigative film journalism, and through privileged access, the film will follow several never-before-seen scenarios. So this implies that the film hasn't yet come out because it keeps saying it will, which is like future talk. That's not like current, like it follows. No, it will follow. And on IMDb, it says that this film, it's labeled for 2020, which to me says like that's when the film came out, although the description suggests that the film hasn't come out. So then I reached out to one of the writers. I found her email address and I sent an email and I was like, hey, just trying to figure out like, was Chester Bennington or Chris Cornell part of this film? Like, what's going on here? Because she's labeled as a writer, but also as a musician or like a singer in the film. So I thought that was interesting. But neither of their names are on IMDb for any film. And I couldn't find where to watch it. That's assuming it has come out, which potentially it hasn't, or if Chester or Chris were involved in the making of the film. Chris is said to be one of the main financial backers of the documentary, which is probably why his name isn't listed on the IMDb page. I don't know. But then, in a little more digging, there was another film that was released or said to have released in 2013. Although every trace of that film is now gone if it ever released. That had the same description as the 2020 film, but was the actual work of Chris and Chester. And they used to have a website for the documentary, but that's all gone now. But there are still some of the videos from the website up online, and I watched them. So these videos feature a man by the name of Paul Mayhill, who explains how they are getting girls from Moldova and moving them to Istanbul via container. Then, from there, the girls are either sold to someone else or they are taken to a hotel, impregnated, and then they have their babies taken from them and they harvest the baby's organs. He said, because this was 2013, right? So he said that he was part of a campaign called Traffic Jam. This campaign was gathering musicians together to raise money to stop child trafficking. And Linkin Park was one of the bands involved. So I looked up Paul Mayhill because I was curious, like, is he dead too? Because that would be like a real smoking gun. They're like trying to shut this whole thing down. So he is not dead. He is alive. He's well. He's very active on social media. You can just look him up and there he is. He is not really in the child trafficking world anymore, which I thought was odd. Like, if that was such a passion of yours, why would you just randomly give it up? Unless he was threatened and forced to give it up. Anyway, there was a really popular social media post about the involvement of Chester and Chris in this film that started going around in 2020. This social media post claimed that DJ Avicii, celebrity chef Anthony Bourdain, Chester Bennington, and Chris Cornell were all working together on this documentary. And we already know that Chester and Chris died, but it is important to note that the Swedish DJ Avicii and Anthony Bourdain also died by suicide. How weird is that? So Avicii died on April 20th, 2018. The official cause of death was suicide due to self-inflicted injuries from a broken wine bottle, leading to blood loss. He was found dead in his hotel room in Oman, where he was on vacation. He was having a great vacation with his friends. He had been working on new music prior to taking the trip. Like, yes, he had retired from music in 2016, so this is 2 years after he had retired from music, just because he needed a break. Like, he was getting really burnt out, the same way Chris had gotten burnt out prior, and I'm sure, like, most people get burnt out with their jobs, but he was, like, kind of easing himself back in. He's like, I'm going to start making music again. I'm going to come back from this vacation. I'm going to record an album. He was ready to go. He was taking his time, but he was, like, enjoying his life. He was happy. But the fact that they called it suicide because he broke a bottle and then broke a wine bottle and bled to death. Or was he in a fight with somebody who couldn't hang him, so they used the wine bottle to kill him instead? Because then after, like, he's bleeding that much, you can't hang him. Like, there's no way, like, he cut himself and then he also hung himself. I guess it's possible, but I don't know. It's a little weird because Anthony Bourdain died a little under 2 months later on June 8th of 2018. His cause of death was suicide by hanging. He was in France working on an episode of his travel cooking show, Parts Unknown, and he didn't show up for dinner with his friend the night before, and then he also didn't show up for breakfast, and so his friend was like, hey, something's weird. It's very weird that 3 out of the 4 of these guys all died by hanging. Like, they clearly didn't want this documentary seeing the light of day. Which tells me that whatever they uncovered has some real weight to it. But it's connected way deeper than that. So, according to what you can see on Google, or what you can Google, Chester's father is Lee Russell Bennington, right? You Google it, that's who pops up. And there's pictures of the pair together. There's no doubt that at some point, Lee Russell has been a father figure to Chester. But Chester doesn't look like Lee Russell Bennington. And he doesn't look like his brother either. So his brother and his father look a lot alike. But Chester's like this odd guy out. He doesn't look like either of them. But you know who Chester really looks like? Almost like identical to? John Podesta. Yep, that's right. The same John Podesta from Pizzagate. So if you're unfamiliar, John Podesta was the chair of Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign, and he was the former White House chief of staff. He was also a senior advisor to President Biden while he was in office. He has worked with the Clintons for a long time. Like, John Podesta is like bad news bears. So the Pizzagate scandal started because John Podesta's emails were leaked, and over 20,000 emails were published on WikiLeaks. Many of the emails included coded messages about pedophilia and human trafficking. Well, John and his shady-ass brother Tony Podesta have been associated with Madeleine McCann's disappearance and the Red Shoe Club. And when it comes to human trafficking and sexploitation, the Podesta brothers' names are all over it. Like, they're like synonymous. It's disgusting. They're disgusting humans. So the theory is that John Podesta is actually the father of Chester Bennington, but instead of raising Chester, he put him in a facility in Canada called Linkin Park. Imagine that. At this place, they conducted MKUltra experiments. And though it was in Canada, the CIA was still funding these experiments, although the Canadian government is not like scot-free in this. They also sent money to the same facility because they were testing on their people, and the US was sending people up there to test on their people, and they were doing all these MKUltra experiments. It was disgusting. So here's the problem. I couldn't find at what point he was given to the Bennington family, or like what that transition looked like, if he was ever given to the family, or if they just like assigned him a family to make it look like he grew up in like a normal house, you know? Like if they were like, you are now Bennington and this is your family and we're going to put that on the internet. That way, when people ask about you, there's a backstory. Because when you look up Linkin Park, like the band symbol, it's like this connected L and P, but with like a circle around it. But the way it's connected, it almost looks like the symbolism for Boy Lover out of like what the FBI put out for the reference in the Pizzagate episode. That's weird, right? That's pretty weird. That it looks kind of similar to that. It's probably just a coincidence. Probably. Anyway, at some point, Chester must have like broken his programming or like deprogrammed himself, because he was working on a documentary to expose pedophile rings. He was literally going to ruin John Podesta's life. But here's another thought. And just stick with me here, because I wanted like a happy, fuzzy outcome of this, even though it's so fucked. What if he was rescued out of the MK Ultra facility by Lee Russell? Because Lee was a detective that worked on child sexual abuse. So what if he rescued Chester and then adopted him? Chester is the youngest in the family. And they're like, we're never going to tell anybody about this because this is like a really crappy backstory, but now you are in our family and everything's good to go. You were born here. You are happy. You're good. I don't know if that's how it worked out. I don't know how Chester got from the MK Ultra facility to Linkin Park with this happy backstory, because he has pictures with Lee. Or was Lee just like this fan? I don't know. The whole thing is really sick and twisted. The fact that he looks just like John Podesta just freaks me out. There is some theories on the internet, and I couldn't verify them, but I'm going to share them anyway, that John Podesta's father, John and Tony, their father was Lawrence Rockefeller, which would then make Chester Bennington actually a Rockefeller, which makes this whole conspiracy and this whole thing just like a little bit more messed up, because like, if you haven't listened to the Rockefeller episodes, or if you haven't listened to Pizzagate, you haven't listened to all these episodes that I'm referencing, go back and listen to them, because like, this is wild. This is crazy. But at the end of the day, all we know is that Chester and Chris and Jeffrey Epstein all died the exact same way, hanging when nobody was around. They've all committed suicide. You know, that's exactly what happened. I got pretty worked up with this one. I hate it when it comes to the kids. I get really pissed off, because like, stop it with the children. Leave the children alone. But instead they keep doing these weird, shady things with the kids, these really nasty things. And then when people are like, I'm going to be a good guy and I'm going to speak out, I'm going to stand up for the kids, which you're like, yes, finally, somebody champion for the children. They get killed. Don't you expose our nasty, weird things that we do behind closed doors? But it should be exposed. We should know about it. Anyway, until next week, my friends, stay skeptical, and I will see you all then. Hey friends, The Rabbit Hole is an independent podcast with everything you hear done by me, Danny Mercy. I appreciate all of your support. Please rate and review wherever you're listening. If you want to follow us on Instagram, it's at rabbit.holepodcast. And thank you, Zakar Valaha, for our awesome intro.